Bullet Girls Phantasia is an import-only hypersexualized anime game for the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation Vita. While games like this often come riddled with issues, most, but not all of them, are typically lucky enough to have a redeeming quality to make them worth a playthrough. We are going to look at the PlayStation 4 version of Bullet Girls Phantasia today and determine what, if any, redeeming qualities this game has. Let's start with the story. Not surprising to anybody, the story begins pretty lazily. A bunch of academy girls are en route to their training when suddenly, seemingly by happenstance, a stargate opens up, transporting them to a new world. This new world is built around basic high fantasy tropes involving elves, orcs, magic, and dragons. Also tanks and helicopters, but we're not going to question those. Once in this world, it becomes the girls' mission to find a way to open a portal and get back home. To my surprise, the game makes a genuine attempt to flesh out this new world with some pretty in-depth history, as well as some fairly large backgrounds for many of the characters you come across. Though I'd argue the game was too ambitious with its cast, introducing too many new characters too fast. By the 6-hour point of the game, you'll have around 13 characters in your party, and you'll be lucky if you could name them all without cheating. But that's only an issue so far as your memory and your ability to retain information is concerned. The characters aren't forgettable due to poor personalities. On the contrary, most feel quite unique. However, it does feel to me like it was just too much too fast, and I personally had trouble keeping up with them. As you meet these new characters and uncover their histories and their position in the world, their motives become the cause for your next in-game mission, and most missions along the way feel like they have a legitimate reason for existing. Many games like this in the past I've seen take a lazy approach to setting up the action, where your characters may simply be doing nothing, and then they get attacked and need to defend themselves. Bullet Girls Phantasia, to my pleasure, does not do this, though it does at times struggle with earning some of its plot developments, especially late game where characters suddenly have previously undisclosed powers, allowing them to take the story and adventure in directions that seem rather unearned. Though this is a small complaint considering the rest of this game actually does really well at filling your adventure with a better sense of purpose than other games of this sort. The visual novel style segments that fill out the narrative are fully voiced in Japanese only, and the translation is great for an Asia English import. The animations during some of these leave a lot to be desired, however, with many animation loops just looking bad, and some of the character posing being pretty stilted with reckless disregard for object crashing. Some conventions that are normal for 2D visual novels don't carry over well to the 3D format either. Simple things like characters leaving the screen by sliding off just end up looking unintentionally hilarious. It's not a long game by any means, clocking in at just around 12 hours for the main story, and about 15 hours for a single playthrough while messing around with the bonus missions. But content is definitely one area where this game suffers. There are no other modes to this title beyond the main story, so unless you want to artificially lengthen your runtime by chasing trophies, this will likely be a one-and-done 15-hour romp for you. If you do chase trophies, prepare to play for far longer than necessary for some of them. A great deal of these trophies are just level capping your characters at level 99, a task that would take beating the game with each character 3 times by my estimation. So yeah. The story, while it starts with some pretty lazy and unearned plot developments, it actually keeps a far better and more interesting shape than I expected it to. Though there isn't much content beyond the game's main story, I did find the 15-hour runtime to be good for the title. So let's look now at how you're going to fill that runtime and get into the combat. So the game plays out in chapters divided into missions. Each mission is a simple third-person shooter bookended with visual novel sections. The third-person gunplay is anything but balanced, but there's a lot of fun to be had here as you go stage to stage, mowing down enemies and completing your goal. In each mission, you can bring 2 people into combat with you, the character you play as and a support character. Each character has a loadout of 3 weapons, which you can upgrade at the game's shop between missions. Which weapons you take are usually up to you, though some characters will have one weapon type locked to them at all times. As you battle and complete missions, you also score JKP, which can be traded to level up character abilities and stats on this grid here. This grid is an eyesore, but it does the trick. You also have material slots which you can equip materials to add new effects to weapons and gain stat boosts. As you play, you'll gain new materials and unlock more material slots. Clothing also grants additional defense, though buying new clothes is pricey AF, and you may not find yourself using the dressing room for much more than uncalled for groping and trying on new panties that you gather from enemy drops in combat. All of this does allow for a unique sort of stat progression system at the very least. Gameplay itself feels like a simple and fun, yet cheap throwback to games like Gauntlet, Serious Sam, or maybe even Earth Defense Force. You go out on the battlefield and navigate your way through fields, mines, castles, and more, taking on orcs, slimes, dragons, and skeletons, as well as the generators that spawn more of them. Controls for the most part are simple, but some functions are rather cumbersome. L2 to aim down sights and R2 to fire, square reloads, and triangle cycles weapons. Personally, I'd like to see weapon selection remapped to the unused D-pad, but that's just a personal preference. X is a dodge and crouch button, and circle is to run. Circle is where we run into problems though, as it's simply used for far too many things. Circle and R2 together is your melee attack, but if you're already running, hitting R2 will dropkick rather than use a standard melee attack, making regular melee attacks just too hard to make good use of. Circle and triangle together also uses a move called Scramble Overdrive. Scramble Overdrive can only be used after you've charged the Scramble Overdrive meter down here, which is done over time by attacking enemies and by picking up power-ups in stages. Scramble Overdrives are really large, really useful character-specific attacks, though there's a special, even stronger version of these called Final Panty Strike, or FPS for short. This can only be used once per stage and only if you're stripped down to your panties. If you desire, you can strip yourself at any point by pressing L2, R2, circle, and X at the same time. So there is a bit to work with here, and what you'll use the most works and plays just fine, though some functions like melee attacks are just cumbersome and poorly executed. All controls considered, I still can't deny that taking on these absolute hordes of enemies is just simple, plain fun. It's a throwback to budget games of old, and yes, it is a little repetitive, but it never got under my skin. There is value to most weapon types, but they're not balanced. Once I discovered the majesty of the miniguns, I didn't look back. Something about them just made me feel badass. Like an anime Arnold Schwarzenegger at the end of Commando, mercilessly mowing down the enemies in my way. There isn't a lot of stage or enemy variety, but thanks to the short runtime of the game, they didn't really get boring. Each enemy has a weak point that if you hit, you deal extra damage to them, though on normal difficulty this is pretty unnecessary. The game is heavily imbalanced in your favor. Even most bosses don't have boss-worthy health meters, but if you get yourself caught in a crowd, you can pretty much bet on your demise. You don't have invincibility frames, and a crowd of enemies can stunlock you bad enough that you can go from full health to dead in under a second. In times like these, the clothing damage system can get annoying, with less than a fraction of a second of gameplay occurring between each cut-in of you losing your clothes. Luckily, these cut-ins can be disabled in 3 different categories in the options menu. Dealing with overwhelming crowds like this doesn't happen in many stages, but the ones that it does happen in can feel like fairly intense difficulty spikes. Overall, I ran into only 2 spikes like this in my playtime. Otherwise, it was just mindless fun. The only other complaint I have about the normal gameplay is the panty shots while climbing. I obviously don't care about panty shots themselves, but the camera behavior to pull them off is a tad disorienting. So this is it for the standard form of gameplay. As simple as it is, I did find it to be a mindless kind of fun that brought me back to a simpler day of budget gaming. Though, as stated at the start, this is a hypersexualized anime game, and that hypersexualization goes a lot further than just the clothing damage system. Similar to the motivation sequences in Criminal Girls 2, Bullet Girls Phantasia has a surprisingly in-depth game mode called Intensive Drilling. These modes pop up pretty much anytime you get a new party member or need a party member to gain more trust in you. Basically, the girls are put into compromising positions, and you have 4 tools at your disposal to poke and prod at them with. There are 29 points on their body you can interact with, and each point has different tendencies, likes, dislikes, and endurance levels. Putting different objects in the girls' mouths can also grant special effects during intensive drilling, and if you perform well enough, you'll enter Kukuro mode, which will double your point values. Poke around and fill the good and bad meters as you see fit before the time runs out. Honestly, this part of the gameplay isn't exactly fun to me, and kind of drags down the campaign. But in fairness, I doubt it was crafted to be a traditionally fun gameplay experience like everything else was. Further into the game, you unlock double drilling and reverse drilling, where you're the one being poked and prodded at. This mode I'm certain will guarantee Twitch eventually bans it from being streamed, and is also the reason why I would never dare to try and stream this game myself. So that basically covers what you're going to be doing for all of the gameplay and the story. But let's get into the technical stuff, because I found a lot of interesting things here, some of which were quite unintentionally hilarious. First off, the visuals. The game is ugly. Notably so. The stages are bland and uninventive in design, and the approach to character design seems drastically off too. Even for a Vita port, it's notably ugly, though you will get used to it in time. In-game performance is great, but in really strange places the performance tanks, like some of the menus between gameplay segments. Load times are long. Music isn't bad, but I found none of it memorable. Sound design is okay, but how they treated things like voices during gameplay is just odd. There's no need to drown your voice clips in reverb when you're in an outdoors environment. Voice acting for your main cast is great, though they don't exactly have anything performance-wise to stretch their acting prowess on.
ドラゴンと魔法使い。何？わからない。まだ情報が不足しているので。ふにゃー。異世界に来ただけでも大変なのに、もう。まあ、難しいことは今から会いに行く魔法使いに聞きましょう。
Enemy voice acting, on the other hand, while I was playing, I noticed one enemy that sounded kind of off. So I muted the music and sound effects and was left with this. Honestly, this just made playing absolutely hilarious. These enemy voices are shit tier through and through, but I kind of love it. So there's not actually much else we can comment on here. I think Bullet Girls Phantasia was a lot of fun. I enjoyed just about all of my playthrough, though the game is incredibly rough in more areas than one. I think if they turned this into more of a franchise and tried a little harder, this could be a great series to keep up with. They got most of the story stuff down, and though it's repetitive, the gameplay is fun. What I'd like to see ideally going forward is multiplayer modes both online and local. Even if it's just to co-op the campaign, the game could lend well to the experience. Clean up the art and sound design, fix some of the cumbersome control mapping, maybe mix up the gameplay with some traps and environment obstacles, and better balance enemies and players so that different guns are more useful, and bosses actually have boss-like health pools. Get all of that and we may be onto something that's easy to sell to more than just the most hardcore niche weeaboos. The game was a lot of fun, but with the added import costs and the limited content and limited replayability, it might not be the easiest one to sell people on. And that's all I'm gonna say on Bullet Girls Phantasia, ladies and gentlemen. If you guys found this video helpful or useful at all, you know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, links to socials are in the description, share the video if you can. As always, folks, thanks for watching. Once again, a huge shout out to my patrons. Without you guys, this video definitely would not have been possible. And a brief apology at the end here. If I sound a little funny, I am just getting over a cold. I'm still a bit stuffed up. Hopefully, by the time Yakuza 0 and Yakuza Kiwami 2 reviews come out, this will all be cleared up. Thanks for watching, folks.